In the laboratory, important ideas are tested through experiments such as detonating objects or studying black holes. One of the suggested ideas was to shoot nuclear waste into space, which appears to be a simple solution to address one of the issues related to nuclear energy. However, this idea is not just bad, but it is considered extremely bad and gets worse the more one thinks about it. The term nuclear waste is ambiguous and has varying categories depending on the country, but generally, it can be classified into three broad levels. About 90% of nuclear waste falls under the low-level category, which includes tools, gloves, or waste from a nuclear facility that may have minimal contamination with short-lived radioactivity and can be safely disposed of. And 7% is intermediate-level nuclear waste, which consists of materials that have been in close proximity to a reactor core long enough to become dangerously radioactive. The proper handling of intermediate-level nuclear waste involves either burying it or melting it down and mixing it into glass or concrete, after which it is stored deep underground. The remaining 3% is high-level nuclear waste, which is very concentrated spent fuel taken out of a reactor core. This waste contains dangerous and highly radioactive elements, and is also incredibly hot and difficult to handle. Around 440 active nuclear reactors produce approximately 11,000 tons of high-level nuclear waste each year, which is what some suggest shooting into space. Starting from 1954, we'd have gathered a total of 400,000 tons of hazardous radioactive waste. The majority of countries choose to postpone the issue, leaving it to future generations to tackle. The idea of shooting this waste into space sounds attractive at first, since space is vast and uninhabited. However, it is not as simple as it sounds. One significant problem is that it requires a lot of money. The cost of launching objects into space is still very high, despite recent improvements in spaceflight affordability. The average cost to launch something into low Earth orbit is around $4,000 per kilogram. In comparison, it only costs about $1,600 to produce 1 kilogram of nuclear fuel. Therefore, launching nuclear waste into space would make nuclear fuel much more expensive and increase the cost of electricity production from nuclear reactors. To launch the waste produced by just one reactor would cost a minimum of $100 million per year. Assuming that we ignore the cost and feasibility issues, launching high-level nuclear waste into space is still not a viable solution due to the limited number of available rockets. In 2021, there were 135 launches into space, which is a record high. If we were to use all those rockets for nuclear waste disposal, we could only lift 800 tons of waste into a low Earth orbit, which is just a small fraction of the current annual high-level nuclear waste output. To dispose of all the waste, we would need at least 14 times more rockets. And even then, we would have to create entirely new space industries to meet the demand for giant toxic space trucks. The second problem with shooting nuclear waste into space is the difficulty in managing space debris and avoiding collisions, as well as the potential risk of the waste falling back to Earth. Launching waste to the moon would require even more expensive rockets, and using the moon as a dumping ground would create a mess. Launching waste deep into space would require even bigger and more expensive rockets, and shooting waste into the sun would require canceling out all the rocket's orbital motion around the sun, making it easier to launch the rocket entirely out of the solar system. There is also a risk that Earth may encounter these interplanetary containers of radioactive dust in the future, causing a meteor shower. Shooting nuclear waste into space may seem like a quick solution to the problem of nuclear waste, but it poses significant risks. Rockets can fail, and the resulting explosions could spread radioactive particles throughout the atmosphere, potentially even to inhabited areas. Coal burning is actually a much larger source of radioactive materials than nuclear waste, producing millions of tons of waste each year, which is handled with far less care. This waste is often left to pile up in leaky mines, or poured into ponds that frequently overflow into nearby bodies of water, contaminating the environment. It's crucial to take a more comprehensive approach to managing all types of waste, to minimize their impact on the environment and public health. Living near coal ash piles can increase cancer risk by up to 2,000 times over acceptable limits due to the radioactive materials they contain, in addition to other toxic chemicals and high CO2 emissions. While nuclear energy is not without flaws, it is a harder sell than coal, and the issue of nuclear waste management and disposal must be addressed. Burying waste deep underground or reprocessing it into new fuel are viable solutions, But shooting it into space is not one of them, as it poses numerous risks and is prohibitively expensive.